Between the Rows podcast is brought to you by Glacier FarmMedia and sponsored by FCC Ag Expert.
Hey, do you know what's new and improved? Ag Expert software.
What's that?
Ag Expert? It's field and accounting software designed for Canadian agriculture.
No, that's Sparkle Sound.
When I say Ag Expert?
Yeah, that.
Well, Ag Expert Field helps you manage your farm. And Ag Expert Accounting is the accounting software in Canadian agriculture. But it's so new and improved, it still has that sparkle to it.
Mm-hmm. Can I use it on my phone?
Of course, it's built for modern agriculture. Try it for free at agexpert.ca.
Welcome to Between the Rows, where you get to hear the stories behind the stories in Canada's leading farm publications.
Hello and welcome to Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Spencer Myers of the Manitoba Co-operator and Glacier FarmMedia. In this episode, we hear from Farmtario reporter Jennifer Glennie about Western bean cutworm scouting. We also hear from Grain News editor Carrie Lynn Belanger about new and notable pests that Saskatchewan producers should be watching out for. But first, let's go back a few months to Ag Days 2020. We'll hear from Yvonne Lawley of the University of Manitoba, who goes over her Ag Days 2020 presentation that looked at the types of cover crops that grow well in Manitoba and how implementing the right cover crop cocktail in your rotation can help improve soil health and improve yields.
Well, the way we're thinking about cover crops has really shifted. The last time we were talking about cover crops on the prairies was when we had fallow in the rotation. And now we don't have as much fallow in the rotation, only in certain areas, but we do have other periods where we can intensify our rotations, looking at the fallow periods at the beginning and the end of the growing season, or spatially within some of our fields. We have areas where we are not able to successfully establish crops, like wet areas or saline areas. And so how can we intensify our systems with these plants to try and channel energy from the sun through plants to feed microorganisms or to reduce erosion or to transpire water out of the soil? There are many different goals that we have for cover crops on the prairie right now. And we have a lot of farmers that are innovating with cover crops on the prairies. We don't necessarily have wide adoption of cover crops right now, but we have a lot of innovation happening. And so part of my research is to work with farmers as they're innovating, as well as to try and characterize what is going on right now. I think for farmers starting with cover crops in grain systems, we're looking at cover crops that are going to do well in that fall period. So many of those are many of the crops that we've grown, maybe not currently, but traditionally, things like oats, things like barley, things like peas. And those may be crops in your areas, but looking at things that we know and crops that we know are a good place to start. So we see rye is also a really important cover crop. It is one of those crops that are reliable or more reliable for overwintering in our cold prairie environment. And so it offers the benefit that you can grow that cover crop in the spring, which is important if you're establishing cover crops later in the growing season or after harvest. We're also seeing a significant number of full season cover crops where you're growing it through the main growing season. Most of those full season cover crops are grown by people who also have livestock and are using them as a source of annual forage. And there we see greater diversity because they're trying to create a forage stand that's going to have great nutritional value for the cattle herd. So we have these different ways of establishing cover crops. And so, again, with the survey, it's really interesting and exciting to get some input from farmers on how they are establishing cover crops. Where we have this really compressed growing season on the prairies, it was really interesting to see that the majority of farmers are still seeding their cover crops with some kind of planter or seeder or air seeder. And I think one of the reasons that we're seeing that right now is to try and increase chances of successful establishment. And we need that seed-soil contact in our environment where we have some really dry periods. Having diversity of plants is important. So one of the things we can do is choose plant species for the cover crops that we're planting that bring the diversity that maybe we don't have in our crop rotation, our grain crops. So maybe if you have a lot of cereals, looking more towards those broadleaves or legumes. Conversely, if you have a lot of those a lot of canola or a lot of soybeans, a lot of pulses in your rotation, then you're probably going to be looking towards those grasses to bring that diversity back into your system. But within that cover crop that you're designing, you probably want to have some diversity there, and that's where we talk about those cover crop cocktail mixes. So having something that has some different plant types, either tap-rooted or fibrous-rooted species, whether they're warm season and cool season species, so you sort of have a succession from the warm to the cool part of the growing season, or having different plant architecture or sensitivity to frost. I think it's really important to have a plan to measure success, because it is a cost, both in terms of seed and it is a cost in terms of your time when you're juggling other busy things. And so you have to be rooted in what your goal is. And if you know what your goal is, maybe it's to provide soil cover, maybe it's to, have a living root growing, maybe it's to have feed. You need to know if you're meeting that goal. And so having a plan to measure success, I think, is really important in evaluating cover crops, because, many of the goals are long-term goals. Some of them are short-term goals and are easy to measure. But you need to have that plan to know whether things pencil out at the end of the day. So some of the ranges of ways we can evaluate whether cover crops are successful or not. If your goal is, to provide cover to reduce erosion, you go out and you look and see how well you have covered the ground. Or maybe you look at the duration of cover. Maybe your goal is to improve soil health, and often those goals are related to soil structure. So simple things like a shovel test may be enough for you to go out and qualitatively or just visually evaluate whether those roots are having an impact on soil structure. Maybe you are interested in, either doing no harm for your yields or to improve yields over time. And there it's important that you start measuring yields and having a check area where you don't have the cover crop growing, so you have a comparable. As a researcher, I would love for that to be replicated, but making it logistically feasible on your farm, just having an area and a representative and not a bad part of the field is important for evaluating whether you're having a yield impact. I am looking to engage with farmers through research and through our survey, which will continue for 2019. You can find me on Twitter at YvonneLawley_UM. And the survey will continue for another 2 years that I've got funding to run it. So we'll be repeating it again in 2020 and 2021. So please stay connected.
That was Yvonne Lawley of the University of Manitoba. You're listening to Between the Rows. I'm your host this week, Spencer Myers. Next up on today's show, we hear from FarmTerrio reporter Jennifer Glennie. She speaks with Matt Rundle, sales agronomist with Harrison Agromart, about Western bean cutworm scouting in Ontario.
So today I'm here with Matt Rundle, agronomist with Harrison Agromart. How are you today, Matt?
Good, Jenny. How are you doing?
I'm good. So where are you talking today? Where are you located?
Yeah, so I'm just here in northern Wellington County, just outside of the town of Clifford, Ontario. And we're in a cornfield here. We're looking for Western bean cutworm today.
And why is Western bean cutworm such an issue for growers?
Yeah, so I'll mention what it is first. So what Western bean cutworm is it's a late season pest affecting corn and edible beans in the province. So you're talking kidney beans, cranberry beans, Otebo beans, etc. And why it's an issue is because it causes economic damage as well as quality damage to the crop. So first of all, economic damage. What happens is the larvae, the little worms of the pest, actually feed on the ear of corn. So we'll focus on corn because that's what we're in here. They feed on the ear of corn and they cause both yield damage. So to quantify that, if you have one worm in every ear, you've basically got up to 15 bushels per acre of yield loss due to Western bean cutworm. So the first component, it's an issue because it's affecting your yield, but it's also affecting quality, because what will happen is once you have an insect like Western bean cutworm make its way into the cob, you're going to have what's called secondary infection of a disease coming in and infecting that kernel and that cob. So you can have mycotoxins and fusarium come in and as a secondary infection, and you're going to be downgraded in quality too. So that's why it's an issue.
And Western bean cutworm's kind of a newer pest to Ontario, am I correct?
Yeah, it's native to North America. The pest has been in the Great Plains of the U.S. for a long, long time, and over the past, ever since about 2008 is when we first started seeing it in Ontario. Especially down in the southern regions of our province. It kind of entered in through Michigan and has made its way up into my geography and beyond. It's covering the entire province now, and yes, and since 2008 has really blown up. So relatively new pest for sure. Yeah.
When is the best time to scout for this pest, and what are growers looking for?
Yeah, good question. So what growers, well, first of all, when to scout is right now. A lot of the corn in the province is right at the tassel timing right now. We want to be looking from anywhere from pre-tassel well into tasseling time for this pest. We started looking and thinking about this pest about a month ago, though, because we started setting up what we call Western bean cutworm traps. And what to kind of back up to talk about the life cycle, in the spring, well, I'll back up and say, over winter, this pest actually overwinters in our soil. So it's in the soil, it's in a pre-pupae state, and then early spring and into the early bit of the summer, it pupates, meaning it becomes, it turns in from a larvae, a little worm, into a moth. And what happens in early July is it actually comes out of the soil as an adult moth, and it mates. And then what happens is the females start laying eggs in the corn crop. So what we're doing first for the last month or so, we've been tracking the adult movement through these traps, a pheromone trap, and we set that up on the western side of the field. Mainly, to back up a little more, you've got both wind-blown Western bean cutworm that can come in from other areas, which, that's why we set it up on the western side, because we get western winds here. You can also have populations overwintering in your soil, so you're getting the twofold effect. But we're trying to first monitor how many moths are coming into the field, and then once we kind of get into what we call peak flight, when we know there's a lot of activity of this moth in the field, we know there's lots of eggs being laid, so we can look for egg masses. And I have one actually here to show you guys. And so basically, I'll just flip the camera around here for you, Jenny, and show you what this looks like. So there's an egg mass right there. Basically, as I zoom back in here, we can talk a little bit more about this. So the egg masses, I'll get a better image here. There we go. The egg mass is kind of a cantaloupe shape. They're small, and they kind of look like a small mini cantaloupe when they're laid. And yeah.
And if I'm correct, there's different colors of the egg masses, and what do each of those different colors represent?
Good question too. So when an egg mass is first laid, a Western bean cutworm, it is a white color, okay? And that means that basically it takes 5 to 7 days for that egg to hatch. So first of all, it's going to be the white color, which this is just kind of sliding out of it. This one here, I just showed you, just sliding out of its white color into more of a tan color, which usually means it's about 3 to 4 days from hatching. And then we slide into a purple or almost a black color. So I'll flip the camera around again and show you one egg mass that I've found earlier in another spot in the field with a purple to black colored egg mass. And that means we're about 1 to 2 days from hatching when it's that purple to black color.
And so just quickly to finish up, what is the best way for growers if they find they have large amounts of egg masses? What is the best way for growers to control that?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're seeing it in your field already at that point in the season, you're likely going to need to look to an insecticide seed treatment. But we can back up and talk about, holistic strategies. Crop rotation. Keeping. If you have big pressures of Western bean cutworm, rotating out of corn and out of edible beans into other crops is a wise decision. You can also look at genetics. So corn that is more resistant to those secondary infections, to those mycotoxins and fusarium. That is a good strategy so that you don't have as much of that secondary infection. And then also genetic traits like the Viptera trait, which control the Western bean cutworm. But again, at this point in the season, if a grower's seeing large quantities and the field is at threshold, well, we're going to look to an insecticide treatment to treat that pest.
All right. I thank you very much for your time today, Matt. And I wish you the rest of the day happy scouting.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You too, Jenny. Thanks.
That was Farmtario reporter Jennifer Glennie speaking with Matt Rundle, sales agronomist with Harriston Agromart. Next up on today's show, we hear from Grain News editor Carrie Lynn Belanger talking with Dr. James Tansey, the insect and vertebrate pest management specialist with Saskatchewan Agriculture. Here they talk about the new and notable pests that Saskatchewan producers should watch out for.
Today I'm speaking with Dr. James Tansey, who is Saskatchewan Agriculture's Provincial Insect and Vertebrate Pest Specialist. Dr. Tansey, thanks so much for speaking with us today.
Absolutely.
As I understand it, in 2017, small insects that were bright red in color were gaining attention in farmers' fields in Saskatchewan. What are these red bugs?
These little red bugs, these peculiar little animals, are a ripalochromid. So that is a member of the dirt-colored seed bugs. It's a relatively diverse family. There's about 2,100 species worldwide. This one is called Paratrechus convivus. It doesn't have a common name. It has in the past been called Paratrechus saskatchewanensis, but that description came after the Paratrechus convivus, so it's now considered a junior synonym. And we're, according to the rules of naming things, we're not allowed to use the Saskatchewanensis name. So Paratrechus convivus is what this animal is called. So the stage that is typically seen in fields and is very conspicuous, this bright red animal that congregates in very large numbers, are the nymphal stage. So that is the juvenile stage. These animals don't have a larval stage, like a caterpillar that you would see with beetles or flies or of course butterflies and moths. So they have nymphs. The nymphs look very much like the adults and get progressively bigger and grow wing buds. So the nymphs of this animal happen to be bright red. And they really like each other's company and they can aggregate in huge numbers.
Excellent. Have you come across any other larval species of red bugs that farmers have been finding in their fields?
Oh, yeah, there's a couple other, yeah. So strictly speaking, nymphs. So if you have that incomplete development, they're considered nymphs. So if you get a caterpillar, that's considered a larva. So yeah, there's the white margin burrower bug, and another animal called the twice-stabbed stink bug or the harlequin bug. And the nymphs of these ones are also bright red, but if you get a look at the photos, you can see that there are differences in the overall body shape of these. The Paratrechus tends to be a little bit more streamlined. White margin burrower bug and the harlequin bug nymphs tend to be a little bit chubbier, we'll say, a little rounder.
Right. Well, what about the host crops for these insects?
Well, we'll talk about Paratrechus in particular. It's still being worked out. I mean, we've seen problems in canola, we've seen problems in corn. There were reports in cereals and some heavy damage to flax last year. So it seems there's a big differences in the chemistries of these plants, and these plants are, I mean, in the case of monocots and dicots are pretty distantly related. So I mean, it seems the host range of this animal is very broad. What exactly is encompassed in the host range of this plant is still being worked out.
Excellent. And what kind of damage have you seen in Saskatchewan fields created by these species? For example, have economic levels been reached?
Yes, the damage has been pretty, where it occurs tends to be localized, but where it does occur can be very heavy. We had a report from last year of a half section of canola being lost. Multiple reports of 20 to 50 acre parts of canola field, cornfields being lost to it. So this animal is actually a piercing sucking feeder, much like a lygus bug or an aphid. So it's actually sticking its proboscis into the plant and drawing fluids. and so the plant loses turgor and flops over. But yeah, great areas of crops can be cleared. Part of the reason for this is the very dense aggregations, and the numbers can just be absolutely astounding. I mean, by the millions.
Wow. And where have you been finding these pests in Saskatchewan?
Again, reports are sporadic. I mean, so it has been typically, in the central area of the province, but we have had reports from all over the growing areas of the province in different crops. Yeah,
Right.
still lots to learn about this animal, including its geographic distribution. So.
Excellent, yes. And are they an invasive species, or have they always been here? And why are we taking notice now?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've received no reports this year so far. Where as last year we'd received some reports. They are native, or thought to be native, to Canada, the U.S., and Mexico, so relatively broad geographic distribution. So yeah, once again, native. I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there spots in a field that are at greater risk of damage? Like low-lying areas or hilltops, slopes?
It seems that it's a little bit on the anecdotal side right now, but there does seem to be a connection between low-lying areas that have historically been characterized by water retention. So that is, bordering on wetlands, areas that were characterized by cattails. So in drier times, of course, a grower is going to plant those areas, but there does seem to be a connection between those low-lying areas and problems with this animal.
Right. And how do you sweep for these insects? What should farmers be looking for in their fields?
Yeah, aggregations of bright red little strange bugs. They do occur relatively low on the plant, although they can aggregate in large numbers on the leaves. And I have seen photos of canola plants just covered in these creatures. We don't currently have an economic threshold for them, and there are no products registered for them. So strictly speaking, we have a difficult time making control recommendations for these based on those two parameters.
Right. And well, should farmers contact you if they find some in their fields?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, contact myself or Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Dr. Tyler Wist is doing a little bit of work on that animal too, and he'd love to hear about it as well.
And are there any studies being carried out right now on these pests?
There are proposed studies, and it's one where I know AFC is trying to squeeze it in on the periphery of other projects, but there are no dedicated projects associated with it right now.
Right. And is there anything else, any other comments you want to make about the other two red bugs, the twice-stabbed stink bug and the white margin burrower bug?
They are only occasional pests. We did get some reports from Alberta in the early around 2010, 2011 time. The economic damage associated with these animals is pretty rare.
So not to worry.
Not to worry too much about these ones. I think the attention that they got was because they're bright red. And you see a large number of them. Paratrechus, on the other hand, I mean, that's one where we've seen a few growers take a real hit.
That was Grain News editor Carrie Lynn Belanger talking with Dr. James Tansey, the insect and vertebrate pest management specialist with Saskatchewan Agriculture. That's all for today's show. I've been your host this week, Spencer Myers, and I hope you join us next week.
Between the Rows podcast is brought to you by Glacier FarmMedia and sponsored by FCC Ag Expert, Canada's #1 field and accounting software. Try it for free at agexpert.ca.
Hey, do you know what's new and improved? Ag Expert software.
What's that?
Ag Expert? It's field and accounting software designed for Canadian agriculture.
No, that's sparkle sound.
When I say Ag Expert?
Yeah, that.
Well, Ag Expert Field helps you manage your farm. And Ag Expert Accounting is the accounting software in Canadian agriculture. But it's so new and improved, it still has that sparkle to it.
Can I use it on my phone?
Of course, it's built for modern agriculture. Try it for free at agexpert.ca.